The morning I found my wife's journal, I discovered I'd been dead to my family for 3 years, and I was the last to know. My name is Robert, and I'm 52 years old. 3 days ago, I was a father of 2, married for 23 years, living in a 4-bedroom colonial in suburban Ohio that I'd spent 2 decades paying off. Today, I'm sitting in a hotel room that smells like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, staring at 7 pages of my wife's handwriting that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. Robert doesn't really see us anymore. He's like furniture, always there, but we don't notice him unless he's in the way. Those words, written in Sarah's careful cursive, were dated 3 years ago. 3 years. While I was working 60-hour weeks, believing I was building our future, my wife was documenting my disappearance from our lives with the clinical precision of a coroner. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what she wrote next. The kids have started making jokes about Dad's daily ghost routine. Emma asked me yesterday if we should set a place for him at dinner, or just let him eat standing up in the kitchen like he always does. I laughed. God help me, I laughed. I remembered that dinner, March 15th. I'd come home late from a client meeting, heated up leftover lasagna, and eaten it standing at the counter while scrolling through emails. I thought I was being considerate, not disturbing their family time. I had no idea I was the punchline of their family jokes. I had no idea that my own daughter was watching me become a stranger in real time. The journal had 847 entries. I know because I read every single one in the bathroom of a Denny's at 2 in the morning, crying into coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. Each entry was a nail in the coffin of the man I thought I was. Each page revealed the systematic erasure of Robert the father, Robert the husband, Robert the human being. But here's what Sarah didn't write about. Here's what she couldn't have known while she was busy documenting my vanishing act. I wasn't just disappearing. I was planning something. Something that would either save my family or destroy what was left of it forever. Because buried in the basement of our perfect suburban home, behind boxes of Christmas decorations and my old college textbooks, I'd been keeping my own secret. A secret that would explain everything. Why I worked those impossible hours. Why I'd been pulling away. Why I couldn't tell them what was really happening to our lives. The cancer diagnosis was just the beginning. What I'd been trying to protect them from was so much worse than any of us imagined. In 6 months, our house would be gone. Our savings would be gone. Everything we'd built would vanish, and I was the only one who knew. While Sarah was writing about my emotional absence, I was calculating how to disappear physically too, because I genuinely believed that's what would save them. I was wrong about everything, but what happened when I finally told them the truth? What happened when I laid that journal on our kitchen table next to the stack of medical bills and foreclosure notices? That's when I learned what my family was really made of. This is the story of how I became a ghost in my own home, and how 10 devastating days changed everything we thought we knew about love, sacrifice, and what it really means to fight for your family when the world is falling apart. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who matter most, if you've ever carried a secret so heavy you thought it might crush you, if you've ever wondered whether protecting someone means pushing them away, then you need to hear what happened next. Because sometimes the biggest lie we tell ourselves is that we're doing it all for them. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like a stranger in your own life. Drop a comment about the secrets you've kept to protect the people you love. And subscribe, because this story has 10 chapters that will change how you think about family, sacrifice, and the difference between being a provider and being present. Chapter 1 starts with the moment I realized my journal reading days were over, and my wife was about to discover that her ghost of a husband had been hiding something that would either save us all or end us forever. When ghosts find their own obituaries. The leather journal was hidden between Sarah's romance novels and self-help books, wedged so carefully I almost missed it. I'd been looking for my old business card holder, something mundane, something that wouldn't shatter my world. Instead, I found 3 years of documented evidence that I'd become a walking corpse in my own home. The first entry was dated exactly 1 week after my cancer diagnosis. The diagnosis I'd kept secret from everyone. Robert seems different lately, distant, like he's already somewhere else. My hands shook as I turned the page. Sarah's handwriting, so familiar from grocery lists and birthday cards, now felt like a stranger's script, describing a stranger's life. But the stranger was me. He came home at 9 tonight, heated up dinner alone, stood at the counter eating like he was in a cafeteria, not his own kitchen. Emma asked if Daddy was mad at us. I didn't know what to say. I remembered that night. The oncologist had called with test results. More scans needed, more possibilities to consider. I'd sat in my car in our driveway for 20 minutes, staring at our lit windows, watching my family move around inside like actors in a play I was no longer part of. When I finally went inside, the normalcy felt suffocating. How could I sit at that table and ask about homework when I might not be there to see Emma graduate? The kids have started making jokes about Dad's daily ghost routine. Emma asked me yesterday if we should set a place for him at dinner or just let him eat standing up in the kitchen like he always does. I laughed. God help me, I laughed. The coffee shop around me faded. Other customers, their conversations, the smell of burnt espresso, everything disappeared except Sarah's words. My daughter had noticed my absence so acutely she'd named it. She'd turned my fear-driven withdrawal into a family joke, and my wife had laughed. I flipped through pages frantically now, watching my marriage dissolve in real time through Sarah's increasingly clinical observations. Robert doesn't touch me anymore. Not sexually. That ended months ago. But he doesn't even brush past me in the hallway. It's like he's avoiding physical contact with his own life. She was right. I had been avoiding contact. Every touch felt like a lie when I was hiding something so massive. How do you kiss your wife goodnight when you're calculating how to pay for experimental treatments? How do you hug your children when you're researching how to protect their college funds from medical bankruptcy? I think Robert is having an affair. It's the only explanation that makes sense. The late nights, the secrets, the way he looks at his phone like it contains messages from another world. Maybe it does. An affair? If only it were that simple. If only my other woman were a person, instead of a mistress, instead of medical bills that were piling up like accusation letters in my basement office. The journal contained 847 entries. I know because I counted every single one in that coffee shop, reading until my eyes burned and my coffee went cold. Each entry was another nail in the coffin of the man I thought I was protecting them from.
becoming how love becomes a burden. The basement office had become my real home. While my family lived upstairs in warmth and light, I spent my evenings surrounded by medical bills, insurance denials, and financial projections that read like death sentences. Not for me, for everything we'd built together. The cancer treatment was going well. The tumor was shrinking. But the costs were metastasizing through our lives with surgical precision, destroying everything in their path. I'd hidden the first bill from the emergency room visit, then the oncologist consultations, then the imaging studies that seemed to multiply like cancer cells themselves. Each envelope that arrived addressed to me felt like a personal attack on my family's future. Sarah would find these bills eventually, I told myself, but not yet. Not until I figured out how to handle them without destroying her faith in our security. She'd grown up poor, watching her parents lose their house when her father got sick. I'd promised her that would never happen to us. I'd sworn our children would never know that particular terror. Now, surrounded by folders marked insurance claims, appeals, and payment plans, I was breaking that promise in real time. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Dinner in 10. Please try to join us tonight."
The please broke me. When had she started begging me to eat with my own family? I climbed the stairs like a man ascending to his execution. The kitchen smelled like Sarah's famous chicken parmesan, the dish she made when she was trying to fix something. The table was set for 4, my place setting waiting like a challenge. "Dad!" Emma launched herself at me with 9-year-old enthusiasm. "Mom made your favorite." My favorite. I couldn't remember the last time I'd noticed what I was eating, much less enjoyed it. Food had become fuel, necessary but flavorless. Everything had become necessary but flavorless. "How was school?" I asked, settling into my chair. The question felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd once known fluently. Emma and our 16-year-old son Jake exchanged a look. A quick, adult look that children shouldn't need to share about their parents. "Fine," Jake said, his voice carefully neutral. "Same as always." Sarah served my plate with unusual attention, arranging the food like she was presenting evidence. "Look," she seemed to be saying, "I'm still trying. I'm still your wife. I'm still here." But was I still her husband? I watched myself cut chicken and make appropriate responses to Emma's stories about her art project, to Jake's updates about his upcoming basketball tryouts. I was performing the role of father, hitting all the expected beats, but the audience wasn't buying it. After dinner, Jake disappeared to his room. Emma lingered, helping Sarah clear plates with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "Daddy?" Emma's voice was small. "Are you sick?" The question hit me like a physical blow. How could she know? Had I become so transparent that even a 9-year-old could see through my performance? "Why would you ask that, sweetheart? You look tired all the time, and sad. Like when Grandpa got sick, before he, you know." Sarah's hands stilled on the plates. She was listening now, really listening, for the first time in months. I should have told them right then. Should have gathered my family close and explained about the cancer, about the bills, about my desperate calculations to save them from the financial devastation that was coming. Should have trusted them with the truth instead of drowning alone in my protection of them. Instead, I kissed Emma's forehead and lied. "I'm just tired from work, baby. Nothing for you to worry about." But Emma's eyes held an adult knowledge that shouldn't exist in a child's face. She knew I was lying. They all knew. When protection becomes destruction. The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday.
Not in our mailbox where Sarah might see it, but hand-delivered by a process server who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I signed for it at the door, my hand steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. 60 days. We had 60 days before the bank could begin proceedings to take our house. The house where Emma had taken her first steps, where Jake had built pillow forts, where Sarah and I had planned to grow old together. The house I'd been paying on for 20 years, believing it was our foundation, our security, our legacy. The medical bills had consumed everything. The insurance company had found creative ways to deny coverage for experimental treatments that might save my life. The appeals process had dragged on for months, while the bills accumulated interest and late fees like compound fractures. I'd liquidated our savings, borrowed against my retirement, taken cash advances on credit cards I'd hidden from Sarah.
None of it had been enough. I sat in my basement office, holding the foreclosure notice, and finally understood what drowning felt like. Not the dramatic thrashing kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind, where you slip beneath the surface so gradually that no one notices until you're already gone. My phone rang. Sarah's ringtone, Love Song by Sarah Bareilles, the song from our wedding. The irony felt like another kick to my already broken ribs. "Hey," I answered, trying to inject normalcy into my voice. "Hey, yourself. I'm at the grocery store, and I was thinking we could try that new restaurant this weekend. The Italian place Emma keeps talking about? A restaurant dinner. $40 we didn't have, charged to a credit card that was already maxed out. But how could I explain that without explaining everything else?" "Sure," I said. "Sounds great." "Really? You sound, I don't know. Are you okay?" No, I wasn't okay. I was the opposite of okay. I was a man watching his family's future crumble while they made dinner plans and discussed art projects and worried about basketball tryouts. I was a man who'd become so obsessed with protecting them that I'd forgotten how to include them. "Just tired," I said. The lie came easily now, worn smooth by repetition. After she hung up, I stared at the foreclosure notice until the words blurred. The process server had been kind, apologetic even. He'd explained the timeline, the legal requirements, the possibility of negotiating with the bank. He'd given me phone numbers for housing assistance programs and financial counselors, speaking in the gentle tone reserved for terminal patients. That night, I found Sarah's journal again. I'd been returning to it like an addict, reading my own dissolution in her careful handwriting. Robert missed Emma's parent-teacher conference today, forgot completely. When I called to ask where he was, he sounded confused, like he'd forgotten he had children at all. Mrs. Peterson asked if everything was okay at home. I said yes, but I'm starting to wonder if I'm lying to everyone, including myself. Mrs. Peterson, Emma's teacher who'd always liked me, who'd always made a point of mentioning how engaged I was as a parent. Now she was worried about us. Now I was the father other parents probably whispered about in the pickup line. The kids don't ask for Robert anymore. They used to run to the door when they heard his car. Now they barely look up from their homework. It's like they've accepted that Dad is decoration, not a participant. This was what I'd done. In my desperate attempt to shield them from financial disaster, I'd turned myself into decoration. A ghost haunting the edges of their lives, present in body but absent in every way that mattered. I closed the journal and walked upstairs. The house was quiet, my family asleep in their beds, trusting that tomorrow would be like today, that Daddy would handle whatever needed handling, that their world was secure. But their world was ending in 60 days, and I was the only one who knew. Have you ever carried a secret so heavy it changed the shape of your soul?
Have you ever loved someone so much that your protection became their poison? When truth becomes the only option. I found Sarah in our bedroom, folding laundry with mechanical precision. The domestic ritual felt like a scene from someone else's life. The life we'd had before cancer, before bills, before I became a stranger to my own existence. She looked up when I entered, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't noticed before. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear for me. Fear that I was slipping away, and she didn't know how to hold on. "We need to talk," I said, the words scraping my throat raw. Sarah's hand stilled on Jake's basketball jersey. "Okay?"
I sat on the edge of our bed, the foreclosure notice in my hands like evidence of a crime, which, in a way, it was. I'd committed the crime of loving them so much, I'd forgotten to include them in our crisis. "I've been lying to you," I began, "about everything." Sarah's face went very still. "The affair?" "No, not an affair. I wish it were that simple." I handed her the foreclosure notice. "We're going to lose the house." She took the paper with hands that weren't quite steady, reading it twice before the words seemed to register. "What is this? Robert, what is this?" "I have cancer." The words hung in the air between us like a bridge burning. Sarah's face went through a series of changes: confusion, disbelief, anger, fear, settling finally on something that looked like grief. "Cancer?" Her voice was whisper thin. "When?" "9 months ago. Stage 3, but the treatment is working. The tumor is shrinking, and the prognosis is good. But the bills..." I gestured to the notice in her hands. "Insurance is fighting everything. We've burned through our savings, our retirement, everything. I've been trying to handle it alone." Sarah stood up abruptly, the laundry scattering across our bed. 9 months? You've had cancer for 9 months and didn't tell me?" "I was trying to protect you, trying to fix it before..." "Before what? Before I noticed my husband disappearing? Before our children started asking if Daddy was sick? Before you turned into a ghost in your own house?" She was crying now, angry tears that she wiped away with sharp gestures. "Do you have any idea what these months have been like? Watching you pull away, wondering what I'd done wrong, thinking you didn't love us anymore? I was trying to save you from what? From being your wife? From being your partner? From helping you fight this?" She threw the foreclosure notice at me, the paper fluttering pathetically to the floor. "You decided I was too weak to handle your cancer, so instead you made me handle your abandonment. Do you think that was easier?" I wanted to explain about her childhood trauma, about her fear of financial insecurity, about my desperate need to be the provider who never failed. But looking at her face, really looking at her for the first time in months, I realized I'd been protecting a woman who no longer existed. The Sarah standing before me wasn't the fragile girl who'd worried about money 20 years ago. She was a woman who'd raised 2 children, built a career, weathered life's smaller storms with grace and strength. I'd been protecting a memory while abandoning the reality. "The kids," I said. "How do we tell the kids?" "Together," Sarah said firmly. "We tell them together, like we should have done from the beginning." We found Emma and Jake in the living room, both pretending to do homework while obviously listening to our conversation upstairs. Children always know more than parents think they do. They'd been preparing for this moment, even if they didn't realize it. "Guys, we need to talk," Sarah said, her voice steady now. They looked up with faces that were trying to be brave. My chest tightened, seeing how much older they looked than they had 9 months ago. My absence hadn't protected them from growing up too fast.
It had forced them to. Dad's been sick, Sarah continued. He has cancer, but he's getting better. The treatment is working. Emma's face crumpled. I knew it. I knew you were sick. Jake just nodded, like this confirmed something he'd suspected. Is that why you've been so weird? Yeah, I said, my voice rough. That's why I've been so weird. I was scared, and I thought I was protecting you by handling it alone. But I was wrong. We might lose the house, Sarah added gently. The medical bills are very expensive, and we're behind on payments, but we're going to figure it out together. Emma crawled into my lap, something she hadn't done in months. Are you going to die?
No, baby. The doctors say I'm going to be fine. But I'm sorry I scared you. I'm sorry I disappeared. Jake moved closer, not quite ready for physical comfort, but needing proximity. So, what happens now? Now we fight, Sarah said. Together, like a family. For the first time in 9 months, I felt like I was home. When families face the fire together. The kitchen table had become our war room. Spread across its surface were medical bills, insurance forms, loan applications, and financial statements that painted a picture of just how close we'd come to losing everything. Sarah sat across from me with a calculator and a legal pad, her accountant's brain already working through numbers I'd been too overwhelmed to organize properly. Okay, she said, pulling off her reading glasses. It's bad, but it's not hopeless. The kids were at school, giving us space to inventory the damage without filtering our conversation through parental reassurance. In the morning light, with coffee and Sarah's methodical approach, the crisis felt manageable for the first time in months. The house, I said. Can we save it? Sarah studied the foreclosure timeline. Maybe, if we can get the bank to agree to a payment modification, and if your insurance company approves some of these outstanding claims. I've been looking at their denial letters, and I think they're wrong about the experimental treatment exclusions. You've been looking at the denial letters? Robert, I found your hiding places 3 weeks ago. The basement office, the files behind the Christmas decorations, the medical correspondence you've been stashing in your toolbox. Did you really think I wouldn't notice mail piling up addressed to you? The revelation hit me like cold water. You knew? I knew you were hiding something medical and financial. I knew you were struggling with something bigger than work stress. What I didn't know was whether you trusted me enough to include me in solving it. Shame burned in my chest. While I'd been protecting her, she'd been investigating, preparing, waiting for me to trust her with the truth. Why didn't you confront me sooner? Because I was hoping you'd trust me enough to tell me yourself. Because I was scared that if I pushed too hard, you'd run completely. Because I love you, you idiot, and I was trying to figure out how to save you from whatever was eating you alive. We spent the morning reorganizing everything. Sarah's approach was systematic, where mine had been chaotic. She created spreadsheets, timelines, priority lists. She called the insurance company and spoke to representatives with the calm authority of someone who understood that squeaky wheels get grease, not someone who'd given up before trying. The experimental treatment, she said after hanging up from her third call, they're saying it's not covered because it's investigational. But your oncologist classified it as medically necessary after conventional treatment failed. That's grounds for appeal. I already appealed, twice. You appealed as a patient. I'm appealing as a spouse with an accounting background who knows how to read insurance contracts. Different approach. I watched her work and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just hope that we might solve our problems, but hope that we might solve them together. That I hadn't destroyed everything irreparably. That evening, we held our first real family meeting. Emma had prepared questions on index cards. Jake had researched our options online. They approached our crisis with the same methodical teamwork Sarah had brought to the bills. So, we might have to move? Emma asked, consulting her cards. It's possible, but we're fighting to stay. Would we stay in the same school district? Sarah squeezed my hand under the table. That's what we're working toward. Jake leaned forward. What can we do to help? The question broke something open in my chest. For months, I'd been consumed with what I could do to protect them. It had never occurred to me to ask what they could do to help protect all of us. "You're already helping," Sarah said, "by being part of this conversation, by not making Dad handle this alone anymore." After the kids went to bed, Sarah and I sat on our back porch with glasses of wine we probably couldn't afford. The September air was crisp, carrying the scent of changing leaves and the promise of winter. "I'm sorry," I said, "for all of it, for shutting you out, for making decisions alone, for becoming a stranger." "I'm sorry too," Sarah said, "for giving up on reaching you, for letting the kids make jokes about your absence instead of fighting harder to bring you back." "The journal," I said. "I read your journal." Sarah turned to look at me. "I know. I left it where you'd find it." "You wanted me to find it?" "I wanted you to see what your protection was costing us. I wanted you to understand that we'd rather face the worst truth together than live with the best lie apart." We sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. Tomorrow would bring more calls to insurance companies, more negotiations with the bank, more difficult conversations about our future. But tonight, for the first time in 9 months, we were facing tomorrow together. Have you ever discovered that the thing you thought would destroy your family was actually the thing that could save it? Have you ever learned that love isn't about carrying burdens alone, but about sharing them until they become bearable? When love means war. The insurance company's office building was all glass and steel, designed to intimidate people like us, people who needed things from people who preferred not to give them. Sarah walked beside me, wearing her most professional suit and carrying a briefcase that contained 9 months of documentation, organized with the precision of a legal brief. "Remember," she said as we approached the elevator, "we're not asking for charity. We're asking for them to honor their contract." The claims representative was younger than I'd expected, probably fresh out of college, armed with computer screens and company policies that felt as flexible as concrete walls. Her nameplate read Jennifer Morrison, and she had the practiced smile of someone who delivers bad news professionally. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson," she said, gesturing to chairs across from her desk. "I understand you're here to discuss the denial of coverage for experimental cancer treatment." Sarah opened her briefcase with the efficiency of a surgeon selecting instruments. "We're here to discuss your company's violation of their own policy guidelines regarding medically necessary treatment." Jennifer's smile flickered. She'd probably expected a desperate emotional plea. Instead, she was facing a woman who'd done her homework. For the next hour, Sarah systematically dismantled every reason the insurance company had given for denying coverage. She cited policy language, medical guidelines, legal precedents. She presented letters from my oncologist, documentation of failed conventional treatments, evidence that the experimental protocol had literally saved my life. "The treatment worked," Sarah said, her voice steady but carrying an undertone of steel. "Your company denied payment for treatment that worked, treatment that your own medical consultants recommended after reviewing my husband's case." Jennifer typed notes, made phone calls to supervisors, disappeared for consultations that felt like small eternities. With each delay, I watched Sarah's professional composure tighten, her patience wearing thin in ways that were dangerous for anyone standing between her and her family's security. "Mrs. Patterson," Jennifer finally said, returning with a supervisor who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, "we understand your frustration, but experimental treatments carry inherent risks." "This treatment saved my husband's life," Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through the corporate speak like a blade. "Your company's policy specifically covers medically necessary experimental treatments when conventional options have been exhausted. That's exactly what happened here." The supervisor, a woman named Margaret Chen, reviewed Sarah's documentation with the careful attention of someone who recognized competence when she saw it. After 20 minutes of silent reading, she looked up with an expression that had shifted from dismissive to concerned. "I need to make some calls," Margaret said. "Can you wait?" We waited in a sterile conference room for 2 hours. Sarah paced like a caged animal, her energy barely contained. I watched her and felt a surge of something that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite arousal, but was entirely recognition. This was the woman I'd married. This was the partner I'd forgotten I had while I was busy trying to protect her. When Margaret returned, her expression had changed completely. "We're going to reverse the denial," she said without preamble. "Full coverage for the experimental treatment, retroactive to the beginning of your protocol. You should see the coverage adjustment within 10 business days." Sarah didn't celebrate. She just nodded, gathered her papers, and stood. "What about the claims that were denied due to these treatments? The supporting care, the additional monitoring, the complication management?" "Those will be reviewed and processed as part of the adjustment." Outside the building, Sarah finally allowed herself a moment of triumph. She leaned against our car and closed her eyes, letting the September sun wash over her face. "How much?" I asked. "How much will this cover?" "Enough," she said. "Enough to save the house. Enough to pay down the credit cards. Enough to give us breathing room." That evening, we called the bank. The mortgage modification department had different hours, different procedures, different representatives who needed different documentation. But Sarah approached this battle with the same methodical determination she'd brought to the insurance company. "We have proof of income adjustment," she told the mortgage representative, "medical hardship documentation, insurance settlement confirmation, and a specific payment plan proposal." The negotiation took 3 phone calls, 2 supervisor consultations, and 1 heated conversation where Sarah's professional composure finally cracked enough to let some authentic emotion bleed through. "This is our home," she said, her voice shaking with carefully controlled fury. "This is where our children live, where my husband is recovering from cancer, where we're rebuilding our lives. We're not asking you to give us something for nothing. We're asking you to work with us while we get back on our feet." The payment modification was approved conditionally, pending final documentation and insurance settlement confirmation. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Enough to stop the foreclosure. Enough to keep our family intact. Enough to prove that sometimes love means putting on armor and going to war for the people who matter most. That night, I watched Sarah update her spreadsheets, checking off victories against our list of battles. She worked with the focused intensity of a general planning strategy, and I realized this was what I'd been trying to protect her from, the chance to fight for us. "I'm sorry," I said again. "Stop apologizing," she said without looking up from her calculator. "Start helping. We're not done yet." When families learn to fight together. Recovery, I discovered, wasn't just about cancer cells dying. It was about learning to live again as a family that had forgotten how to be together. The insurance settlement had bought us time and security, but it couldn't repair the months of distance, the habits of isolation, the trust that had been stretched thin by secrets and silence. Emma started therapy first. She'd been carrying her own secret burden,
the weight of watching her father disappear and not knowing why. Her counselor, Dr. Martinez, explained that children often blame themselves when parents withdraw, that Emma had been wondering what she'd done wrong to make Daddy stop seeing her. "She's been trying to be perfect," Dr. Martinez told Sarah and me during a family session. "Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect daughter. She thought if she was good enough, you'd come back."
The revelation shattered something inside me. While I'd been trying to protect Emma from financial worry, she'd been trying to save me from whatever sadness she thought she'd caused. We'd been two people drowning separately in the same ocean, each convinced the other was too fragile to help. Jake's response was different, but equally heartbreaking. He'd appointed himself the family's emotional barometer, monitoring Sarah's moods, Emma's anxieties, my absences. At 16, he'd become a parent to all of us, and the responsibility had aged him in ways that showed around his eyes. "I knew something was really wrong," he told Dr. Martinez, "but nobody would tell me what. So I just tried to keep everyone else from falling apart while I figured it out." Family therapy became our new normal. Tuesday evenings in Dr. Martinez's office, learning to communicate feelings we'd been swallowing for months. Learning that protection and inclusion weren't mutually exclusive. Learning that children are stronger than we give them credit for, and that honesty, even painful honesty, builds trust instead of destroying it. "Robert," Dr. Martinez said during one session, "you made decisions based on fear. Fear of burdening your family, fear of being seen as weak, fear of losing control. But fear-based decisions rarely serve the people we're trying to protect." "I thought I was being strong," I said. "You were being strong, but you were being strong alone, which is actually a form of weakness disguised as strength. Real strength means being vulnerable enough to ask for help." At home, we established new routines. Family dinners became sacred again. Phones put away, conversation encouraged. We started taking walks together in the evenings. Emma chattering about school, Jake sharing stories about his friends, Sarah and I rediscovering the rhythm of being married instead of just coexisting. The physical intimacy returned gradually. Not just sex, though that eventually came back too, but the small touches that had disappeared during my months of withdrawal. Sarah's hand on my shoulder while I made coffee, my arm around her waist while we watched television, Emma climbing into my lap to read together, Jake accepting hugs without the stiffness that had developed during my ghost months. My own therapy was harder. Individual sessions with Dr. Martinez, where I had to examine the man I'd become, the husband and father I'd been before cancer, the person I wanted to be moving forward. "You equated love with providing," Dr. Martinez observed. "When the providing became impossible, you felt like you had nothing to offer your family. I was supposed to take care of them. You were supposed to be their partner, their father. Taking care of them includes letting them take care of you." The cancer treatment continued, but now Sarah came to appointments with me. She took notes, asked questions, advocated when I was too tired or overwhelmed to advocate for myself. The medical team responded differently to us as a couple than they had to me alone. More thorough explanations, more creative problem solving, more hope. "Your support system makes a huge difference in treatment outcomes," my oncologist, Dr. Reeves, told us. "Patients who fight alongside their families statistically do better than patients who fight alone." 3 months after the insurance victory, I had my first completely clear scan. No evidence of disease. The experimental treatment had worked, and my prognosis was excellent. We celebrated at the Italian restaurant Emma had wanted to try, the dinner out that had once seemed impossible. "To Dad not being a ghost anymore," Jake said, raising his Coke in a toast. "To families that stick together," Sarah added. "To second chances," I said, and meant it. Emma giggled.
to not eating dinner standing up in the kitchen anymore. That night, lying in bed with Sarah's head on my chest, I listened to the sounds of our house settling around us. Jake's music drifting down the hall, Emma's voice as she talked to her stuffed animals, the familiar creaks and sighs of a home that was truly ours again. "Do you think we're gonna be okay?" I asked. Sarah lifted her head to look at me. "I think we're gonna be better than okay. I think we're gonna be a family that knows how to weather storms together."
She was right. We were stronger because we'd almost been broken. We were closer because we'd learned to bridge the distance. We were more honest because we'd survived the truth. Recovery, I learned, wasn't about going back to who we were before. It was about becoming who we were meant to be all along. When second chances become new beginnings. 6 months after our kitchen table war room sessions, our house had transformed into something entirely different. Not just because we'd kept it, though that victory still felt miraculous some mornings, but because the people living in it had remembered how to be a family instead of 4 individuals sharing space. The basement office was no longer my hiding place. Sarah and I had converted it into a proper family room, complete with a sectional sofa where we watched movies together and a gaming setup where Jake taught me to play video games I was terrible at, but enjoyed anyway. The medical bills were gone, filed away in a single folder marked "Conquered" in Emma's careful 9-year-old handwriting. Emma's art covered the refrigerator again. Not just the obligatory school assignments that had accumulated during my ghost months, but new pieces she created specifically for me. Drawings of our family, where everyone was smiling, where Daddy wasn't standing apart from the group, where we all fit together like puzzle pieces designed for each other. Jake had started talking to me again, really talking, not just the functional communication of someone tolerating a roommate. He told me about his girlfriend, about his college plans, about the basketball scholarship he was hoping to earn. I realized I'd missed most of his junior year while I was drowning in my own crisis, and he filled me in on the life he'd been living while I wasn't paying attention. "I was kind of relieved when you told us about the cancer," he admitted one evening while we worked together in the garage, organizing tools I hadn't touched in months. "Not that you were sick, but that there was a reason you disappeared. I thought maybe you didn't want to be our dad anymore." The honesty punched me in the chest. "Jake, I never stopped wanting to be your dad. I just forgot how." "Yeah, I get that now. But for a while there, it felt like you'd decided we weren't worth staying for." We worked in comfortable silence after that, father and son sharing space without the tension that had defined our relationship during the worst months. It wasn't the same dynamic we'd had before. Jake was older now, more independent, shaped by the experience of watching his family almost fracture. But it was better in some ways, more honest, more resilient. Sarah had started a blog called The Financial Recovery Chronicles, documenting our journey from medical bankruptcy to stability. It had gained a surprising following, other families facing similar crises, people dealing with medical debt, spouses learning to navigate insurance systems and mortgage modifications. "You should write about the emotional part too," she suggested one evening, showing me comments from readers, "about what it's like to be the person carrying the secret, the one who thinks they're protecting everyone by handling it alone." I'd been thinking about that suggestion for weeks. Writing had always been therapeutic for me, though I'd abandoned it during the crisis months, along with everything else that felt non-essential. Now, with clear scans and stable finances, I was rediscovering parts of myself that had gone dormant. The medical counseling continued, though Dr. Martinez had shifted our sessions from crisis management to relationship enrichment. We were learning each other again, not the people we'd been before cancer,
but the people we were becoming after surviving it together. "You're both different now," Dr. Martinez observed during one session. "Sarah, you've discovered strength you didn't know you had. Robert, you've learned that vulnerability can coexist with masculinity. The question is, do you like who you're becoming?"
The answer was yes. I liked the man who could ask for help without feeling diminished. Sarah liked the woman who could fight for her family with fierce competence. We liked the partnership we were building, more honest than before, more intentional, more aware of how quickly the foundation of a life can shift. Emma had started asking questions about money, about insurance, about how families make big decisions together. Not with anxiety, but with the natural curiosity of a child who'd been included in age-appropriate conversations about adult challenges. "When I grow up and get married," she announced over breakfast one Saturday, "I'm going to tell my husband everything, even the scary stuff." "That's very wise," Sarah said, catching my eye across the table. "Because," Emma continued, spreading jam on her toast with intense concentration, "families are supposed to be on the same team, even when the game is hard." Out of the mouths of babes. Emma had articulated what it had taken me months of therapy to understand, that marriage isn't about one person protecting the other from life's difficulties, but about facing those difficulties as teammates. The community around us had noticed the change too. Neighbors who'd grown accustomed to my absence commented on seeing me at school events again, at Emma's soccer games, at the block party where I actually stayed for more than an hour. The normalcy felt extraordinary after months of isolation. "It's good to have you back," our neighbor Carol said at the block party, handing me a beer I could afford to accept without calculating its cost against grocery money. Back. I was back. Not just physically present, but emotionally engaged. Not just surviving, but participating. Not just existing in my family's orbit, but helping to create the gravitational pull that kept us all connected. That night, lying in bed with Sarah reading beside me, and the sounds of our children settling into sleep down the hall, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year: contentment. Not the desperate gratitude of someone who'd almost lost everything, but the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd learned what everything really meant. "We're going to be okay," I said, more statement than question. Sarah marked her place in her book and turned to face me. "We're already okay. Better than okay. We're actually living our lives instead of just getting through them." She was right. We'd moved from survival mode to something richer, more intentional. We'd learned that love isn't about carrying burdens alone, but about distributing the weight until everyone can stand. We discovered that families can be stronger in the broken places, like bones that heal thicker than they were before. When broken places become beautiful scars. 1 year after finding Sarah's journal, I was sitting in the same coffee shop where I'd first read about my own disappearance. But this time, I wasn't alone. Sarah sat across from me, Emma colored at a table nearby, and Jake was at basketball practice. Normal family logistics that once felt impossible to coordinate. I was writing again. Not just therapeutic journaling, but actual writing. Stories about families in crisis, about men learning to be vulnerable, about the difference between protecting people and including them. Sarah's blog had inspired me to share our story more publicly, and to my surprise, people were listening. "Dad, look!" Emma held up her coloring page. A family portrait where everyone was the same size, where no one stood apart from the group, where all the figures were holding hands. It's us being happy. "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. The woman at the next table smiled at our interaction. "She's beautiful," she said. "You can tell you two are close." A year ago, That comment would have felt like mockery. Now it felt like recognition of something real, something rebuilt from the ground up with intention and care. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Practice ended early. Can you pick me up?" Can you pick me up? Such a simple request from a teenager who'd learned not to depend on his father's availability. I packed up my laptop immediately. "Jake needs a ride," I told Sarah. "Go," she said, gathering Emma's art supplies. "We'll meet you at home." The drive to school took 15 minutes. 15 minutes of possibility that once would have felt like an inconvenience, but now felt like an opportunity. Jake climbed into the passenger seat with the easy familiarity of someone who expected his father to show up when needed. "How was practice?" I asked. "Good. Coach thinks I might make varsity next year." He paused. "Will you come to the games if I make varsity?" "I'll come to every game you want me at," I said. "Home, away, doesn't matter." Jake nodded, satisfied. We drove in comfortable silence, father and son sharing space without the tension that had once defined our relationship. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of understanding, of trust rebuilt, of time that no longer felt stolen. At home, Sarah was cooking dinner while Emma set the table. The scene was so normal, it felt revolutionary. A year ago, I would have heated up leftovers alone while my family ate together without me. Now, I was part of the choreography of family life. Expected, included, necessary. "How's the writing going?" Sarah asked, stirring something that smelled like home. "Good. I'm working on a piece about medical advocacy, about what I learned watching you fight the insurance company." Sarah smiled. "You mean what you learned about letting your wife fight for your family instead of thinking you had to do everything alone?" "Exactly that." During dinner, Emma announced that she'd been chosen for the school talent show. Jake shared news about his upcoming driver's test. Sarah talked about a new client whose financial situation reminded her of ours a year ago. I listened to my family's voices, layering over each other like instruments in a symphony I'd forgotten I was part of. After the kids went to bed, Sarah and I walked around our neighborhood, a routine we'd established during my recovery that had become one of our favorite parts of the day. The houses glowed with warm light, families visible through windows, living their lives with the same mixture of routine and crisis that defined all human existence. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found the journal?" Sarah asked. I considered the question seriously. I think I would have kept drowning until there was nothing left to save. I think I would have destroyed us trying to protect us. "I think you would have found your way back eventually," Sarah said, "but it might have taken longer, and we might have lost more in the process." We stopped at the corner where our street intersected with the main road, the place where our quiet neighborhood connected to the larger world. A year ago, this intersection had felt like a barrier. Our problems on one side, everyone else's normal lives on the other. Now, it felt like a gateway, a reminder that everyone was fighting battles that weren't visible from the outside. "I want to tell people," I said, "about what we went through, about what I learned, about how families can survive when they face things together." "Tell people how?" "I don't know yet. Maybe a book? Maybe speaking to other families going through medical crises? Maybe just being honest when people ask how we're doing, instead of saying fine automatically." Sarah squeezed my hand. "I think that's a beautiful idea. I think your story could help other people who are drowning the way you were drowning." "Our story," I corrected. "It's our story now." That night, I started writing in earnest. Not just for therapy or personal processing, but with the intention of sharing what we'd learned about love, crisis, communication, and the difference between protection and partnership. I wrote about the man who'd become a ghost in his own home, and the family that had refused to let him disappear completely. I wrote about second chances and the courage to accept help, about wives who fight like warriors, and children who are stronger than we give them credit for. About the moment when you realize that love isn't about carrying burdens alone, but about sharing them until they become bearable. Most importantly, I wrote about transformation, about how the worst things that happen to us can become the catalysts for becoming who we were meant to be all along, about how families can be stronger in the broken places, like bones that heal thicker and more resilient than they were before, when stories become bridges to tomorrow. 2 years after finding Sarah's journal, I was standing on a stage in front of 300 people, telling our story to an audience of families facing their own medical crises. The conference organizers had found me through the blog I'd started, and somehow my words about becoming a ghost in your own home had resonated with people across the country. In the front row, Sarah sat with Emma and Jake, my family present for this moment in a way they hadn't been present for so many moments during the dark months. Emma held a sign she'd made that said, "That's my dad," with hearts drawn in purple marker. Jake looked embarrassed by his sister's enthusiasm, but proud enough to wear a button with my book cover on it. The book, The Ghost Father, A Family's Journey Through Crisis and Back to Each Other, had been published 6 months earlier, and it was reaching people I never could have imagined. Parents who recognized themselves in my story of withdrawal and protection. Spouses who saw their own marriages in Sarah's account of fighting for someone who'd stopped fighting for themselves. Children who understood Emma and Jake's confusion when a parent becomes a stranger. The hardest part, I told the audience, wasn't the cancer. It wasn't the bills or the insurance battles or the threat of losing our house. The hardest part was learning that love without inclusion isn't protection, it's abandonment dressed up as sacrifice. After my presentation, people approached with their own stories. A woman whose husband had pulled away after his heart attack. A man whose wife had become distant during her mother's long death from dementia. Teenagers who felt like their parents were disappearing into adult worries they weren't allowed to understand. "How do you come back from that?" a woman asked me, tears in her eyes. "How do you rebuild trust when someone you love shuts you out completely?" "One conversation at a time," I said. "One honest moment at a time. One decision at a time to choose inclusion over protection." The book signings were emotional affairs. People shared stories they'd never told anyone, confessions about their own ghost behavior, gratitude for words that helped them feel less alone. I signed copies for families fighting battles similar to ours, and for individuals who recognized themselves in different parts of our story. That evening, back in our hotel room, Sarah and I watched the kids swim in the pool below our window while we debriefed the day. These conferences had become family trips, opportunities to travel together while sharing our story with people who needed to hear it. 300 people, Sarah said, shaking her head. 300 families who might have better communication because of what we went through. What we survived, I corrected. What we learned from. Emma burst into the room, dripping wet and excited. "Dad, a lady in the elevator said she read your book and it helped her family talk about scary stuff together." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Are you famous now?" Emma asked with 9-year-old directness. "I'm Dad now. Really, truly Dad. That's better than famous." Jake appeared in the doorway, more reserved, but clearly moved by the day's events. "Some of those people were really struggling," he said. "Like, really bad." "Yeah," I said, "the way we were struggling 2 years ago. But we made it through," Jake said. "We're okay now." "We're better than okay," Sarah added. "We're a family that knows how to face hard things together." That night, after the kids were asleep in the adjoining room, Sarah and I sat on the hotel balcony looking out at the city lights. Somewhere in those buildings were families fighting battles similar to ours, people learning to survive crisis and maybe even thrive afterward. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't left that journal where you'd find it?" Sarah asked. "Every day," I said. I think about how close we came to losing everything that actually mattered, while I was trying to save everything I thought mattered. I think about the journal entries I didn't write, Sarah said. The ones where I gave up trying to reach you. The ones where I stopped believing you'd come back to us. But you didn't give up, neither did you. You just forgot how to let us help you not give up. 3 years from the foreclosure notice, our house felt like a completely different place. Not just because we'd kept it, but because the people living in it had learned how to be present with each other. The kitchen table where we'd fought our financial battles had become the place where Emma did homework while Sarah and I cooked dinner together. The basement office where I'd hidden from my family was now the room where Jake practiced guitar and Emma built elaborate Lego cities. The medical bills were gone, but more importantly, the secrecy that had accompanied them was gone too. We'd learned to face problems as a team, to include each other in both the struggles and the solutions. We discovered that children are more resilient than we give them credit for, and that protection without communication is just isolation wearing a disguise. My cancer remained in remission, but the real healing had been learning to live as part of a family instead of as someone carrying a family's burdens alone. The real recovery had been remembering that love means sharing the load, not carrying it solo until you collapse under the weight. Sarah's blog had evolved into a nonprofit organization helping families navigate medical crises with both financial and emotional support. She'd found her calling in the crisis that had almost destroyed us, turning our darkest months into a bridge other families could cross toward their own healing. Emma was now 11, and she remembered the time when Daddy was sad and distant, but she also remembered the time when our family learned to talk about hard things together. She'd grown up knowing that families can survive almost anything if they face it as a team. Jake was preparing for college, and he chose to write his admission essay about watching his family almost break apart, and then choosing to rebuild stronger. He'd learned lessons about communication and vulnerability that would serve him well in his own future relationships. As for me, I was no longer the ghost father. I was present, engaged, included, and including others. I'd learned that being a man doesn't mean solving every problem alone, and that being a husband and father means being vulnerable enough to let your family help you be strong. Our story wasn't unique. Every family faces crises that test their bonds. But our response had become something worth sharing. The radical act of choosing transparency over protection, inclusion over isolation, partnership over martyrdom. Standing on that hotel balcony, looking out at a city full of families fighting their own battles, I felt profound gratitude. Not just for surviving our crisis, but for learning from it. Not just for keeping our house, but for making it a home again. Not just for staying married, but for becoming partners in the truest sense. The ghost father was gone, replaced by a man who knew that love means showing up, speaking truth, asking for help, and trusting the people you love to be strong enough to handle whatever life brings. Our story wasn't unique. Every family faces crises that test their bonds. But our response had become something worth sharing. The radical act of choosing transparency over protection, inclusion over partnership, over martyrdom. Standing on that hotel balcony, looking out at a city full of families fighting their own battles, I felt profound gratitude. Not just for surviving our crisis, but for learning from it. Not just for keeping our house, but for making it a home again. Not just for staying married, but for becoming partners in the truest sense. The ghost father was gone, replaced by a man who knew that love means showing up, speaking truth, asking for help, and trusting the people you love to be strong enough to handle whatever life brings.
If our story can help even one family choose communication over silence, inclusion over protection, vulnerability over false strength, then every painful moment of our journey was worth it. Because sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we're afraid to have. And sometimes the people we're trying to protect are actually the ones strong enough to save us. Thank you for listening to our story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt like a ghost in your own life, or loved someone who was disappearing before your eyes, please share it with others who might need to hear that families can heal, that communication can bridge any distance, and that love is stronger when it's shared rather than carried alone. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances. Drop a comment about your own family's journey through difficult times, and subscribe, because every family story of surviving and thriving together is worth telling. Remember, you don't have to be a ghost in your own life. Your family needs you present, not perfect. They need your truth, not your protection from it. And they need to know that whatever storms you're facing them together. Because that's what families do. They show up for each other, especially when showing up is hard.